week, I fulfilled one of the 15 signs of doomsday, specifically the one right before the plants of the world filling with blood, by releasing a video talking about how excited I am by the prospect of 10th edition Warhammer 40k, and how Games Workshop's announcement of the new edition seems to be addressing a ton of problems with the current edition of Warhammer. Last week, I was super hyped. Games Workshop were saying all the right things. Free rules, smaller game modes making Warhammer cheaper to play, a less complicated system, data cards instead of codices, and the end of stratagems. I celebrated these changes on the channel, and I was ready to give Games Workshop a ton of praise. Well, since that video, Games Workshop have pumped out article after article on how 10th edition works. They're basically treating news posts on 10th edition like Space Marine lieutenants at this stage. And I have been following this super closely, reading every single one, devouring as much info as possible. And I am getting extremely nervous because while the words from GW may be sweet, I think there's a huge bitter pill on the way right for us. I'm really worried that we might be heading straight for a cliff edge and no one is talking about it.
Look out! Cliff!
But first, the good, because GW have given us a ton of info about the new edition, and there is stuff to praise. The core rules of 10th edition have been confirmed as free to download online at release, and GW are committing to that. That means you don't have to buy a massive chunker of a rulebook before you've even licked your first mini. This is great. It makes the entrance points to Warhammer a lot cheaper, and it's in line with Warcry and Age of Sigmar, and let's be honest, most other war games too. Free rules has pretty much been the market standard for a while now, so it's nice to see Games Workshop catch up with their competitors here. Even better though, all the data cards for every faction will be free online as well. That's basically all the stats and special abilities. This is pretty unprecedented when it comes to 40k, and it means unit stats and special traits for those units will be free. This is awesome, and in theory means that players will no longer need to buy codices just to play the game either. In theory anyway. I'll be circling back to the future of the codex system later. Again though, free unit stats is pretty market standard. 40k was sort of the space demon and the Arctic research team here. It was the odd one out for not doing this already is my point. But Warhammer 40k is the biggest game on the market, so this change will be very impactful for a lot of players, and it's nice to see 40k gain parity with a lot of other war games. It should have been done a long time ago, but better late than never. Now, Games Workshop aren't ones to leave money on the table. There will be hard copies of the data cards sold, presumably on card stock. They'll be purchasable in physical card packs. GW have promised though that they'll be inexpensive to buy, and inexpensive is a word that GW don't tend to use a lot, so pretty much everybody is confused. I'm not gonna caution though that inexpensive for GW could be anywhere from $20 to $2,000. We're talking about a company that sells dice packs for 40 bucks after all. They like to go a little wild if they think they can get away with it.
I mean, it's one banana, Michael. What could it cost? $10?
In terms of army building, power levels are being dropped too. Finally, we're getting back to the point system, which is great. Pretty much the main thing that 40k does better than almost any other war game out there is list building. Army building is the central mechanic to 40k, and using power to build armies always felt pretty anathema to that. Different weapon options and unit gear customization never felt accommodated for in power levels because units cost the same amount of power no matter what you equip them with. This meant that when building an army, there's very often a right or wrong answer with how to equip them. Just build plasma guns. The thing that balances them is that they're more expensive points wise to put in a unit. So both plasma guns and bolters cost the same in power. Why would I ever bring the bolters? Aside from my unquenchable need to be punished on the table. Hurt me, Daddy Emperor! I wish to be slain! I mean, there's no point to this sort of choice if there's a right or wrong answer, and armies built using power never felt balanced or particularly considered. So I'm glad to see a return to old school points for 10th edition. But probably the most exciting gameplay change for me is that Games Workshop have revealed that they are decoupling sub-factions and playstyles from in-universe factions, which is really, really cool. This means that if you've painted your models in a certain way, say a cool nimbus with subtle coloring and a tasteful thickness, my god, It even has a watermark. And you want to have your force be a spin-off of Space Wolves. Well, you won't be locked into a certain Space Wolves way of playing, a certain Space Wolves playstyle. Because now the sub-factions that players choose are called detachments, and they have more generic names like Gladius Task Force, or I Testudines Coast Guard, or Latin Soldier Man. This means that players can paint models however they want and then pick and switch around detachments all willy-nilly. Judge me not by the color of my paint, but by the contents of my, special rules? There's been a ton of grumbling about this online, talking about how this is removing all the flavor from sub-factions. But I don't have a ton of sympathy with this position personally. I think the game is best when we're creating our own lore, our own armies, and customizing our own stuff. This is a creative hobby, and this decision from GW encourages people to paint their models with lots of cool, unique color schemes, knowing that they're not going to miss out on some OP rules because they didn't color their miniatures red, and Blood Angels happen to be powerful this season. And Games Workshop encouraging creativity from hobbyists is something that I'm always going to celebrate. I play a custom Imperial Guard regiment, a custom Dark Eldar raiding party, and now a custom Space Marine chapter. I lost that bet. I'm really happy with this. This isn't entirely altruistic from GW though. There is a commercial reason for this change, and it's that it allows Games Workshop to begin transforming more factions in the same way that they recently transformed Imperial Guard. For those who don't know, Imperial Guard used to be all about building a specific regiment that had all the one uniform and looked the one way. You were a Cadian regiment, a Krieg regiment. By God, boy, you were a 95th Highlanders. But now, it's all souped up like a parent falling into slime in a 1990s Nickelodeon quiz show. I can have a regiment with Katakan soldiers, Krieg soldiers, and Cadian soldiers all fighting alongside each other, all of them with different stats and special abilities. I want this on the record. I am not in favor of mixed regiments. I am in favor of segregated regiments, and we need to bring back segregation as soon as possible. And I want you to quote me on that out of context at every opportunity. But this new detachment style will allow GW to do the same thing with other armies, like Space Marines and chapter special units that anybody can use in their army regardless of the chapter that they collect for, increasing the size of the audience for these models, things that used to be more niche. Yes, this means the Games Workshop will be selling more Space Marine models to Space Marine players. A lot more Space Marine models to Space Marine players. I hope you're excited as I am. This leads me to my first major concern with 10th edition, and that's army building. Games Workshop have pretty much revealed how players will construct their armies in 10th edition, and it's weird. What they're saying does not match up with what they're showing. I don't want to say that they're lying, but...
Hitler promised not to invade Czechoslovakia, Jeremy. Welcome to the real world.
Yeah. So the whole new 10th edition is supposedly being designed under the ethos of simplified, not simple. Chanel for man. And the army building system in 10th does overall seem relatively elegant. GW are removing force organization charts and command points, which all sounds great. But aside from that, it seems really similar to 9th edition. First you pick your army, then you choose your detachment rules. Again, detachments are this edition's sub-factions. And these detachments come with a ton of special rules. Each detachment will have its own army-wide special abilities, enhancements, stratagems, unit restrictions, maybe even relics and warlord customization. And these are all major changes to how a faction plays. And I just don't see how any of this is really that different from 9th edition and the current codex system. Personally, I would have preferred it if GW focused on just making every faction feel different from one another instead of getting lost in the weeds trying to make dozens of special sub-factions. Why do this? The game already has at least a dozen factions, probably a lot more depending on how you count them. Why add even more special rules on top? Well, the answer is sadly obvious. These detachment special rules are going to be used to push codices in the future. GW have only committed to releasing the core rules and data cards for free online, not the detachment rules. I think they plan on selling those in books again. And that means that we're really at risk of quickly going back to the same situation that we're in right now, with codex after codex, each more powerful than the last. New units, new rules, dozens of new detachments, and dozens of new codices, and right back to square one with power creep all over the place. Back to 40k being a bloated game again. So all my hype about GW dropping codices has basically been crushed. What's the point in slimming down the game right at the start of 10th edition, getting us to an awesome playable stage with indexes, and then just releasing all the rules again over a 2-year period, moving us right back to where we are and forcing players to have to spend tons and tons of money if they want to keep up? All right, I see now. Oh, okay. Okay, yes, I suppose forcing players to buy all these special rules just to keep up with everyone else will make Games Workshop a lot of money in the short term. But if this is GW's intention, then they aren't being honest with players right now. If this is how 10th edition is going to go, then it's currently being sold on a lie. Games Workshop are stressing in all their articles about how simplified, streamlined, free, and accessible everything will be in 10th edition. But when I actually look into the substance of how the new game will look, all I can see are how this game is going to go right back to how it is now. And if that does happen, that's going to burn a lot of players, especially new players that get into the game in 10th edition, of which there's a lot of, by the way. I've spoken with lots of them. And if GW do this, if they pull the rug from other players again, that is going to seriously hurt their long-term brand. That level of cynical disrespect for a player base will engender a ton of backlash in the community. So I'm keeping an eye on this. It'll be the final straw for me if we're right back to square one in a year's time. As part of the simplified, not simple design ethos, GW are also claiming to be removing every rule and interaction that's too clunky in the game, which in theory does sound good, but that's only as good as the execution. For example, GW have admitted that stratagems have gotten out of hand in 9th edition, which, yeah, sure, that's one way to put it, like saying the whole clown thing got out of hand for Gacy. But what are they going to do about it in actuality? Well, GW are acting like they're removing most of the stratagems. They keep saying, players won't need to remember 1,000 things when playing the game. But as far as I can tell, reading between the lines, there still seems to be a ton of stratagems in 10th edition. In the Warhammer community post on the new army building rules, GW mentioned that in 10th edition, there are pages of stratagems in the core rules. And then on top of that, there'll be a double page spread of army specific stratagems. And then on top of that, each detachment will come with 6 extra special stratagems each. And then on top of that, leaders get even more special stratagems as well. This is sounding like there's gonna be a ton of stratagems, you guys. I thought the goal was to get rid of these things, not rearrange where they go in the rulebook. Games Workshop may be saying that there's too many stratagems, but it seems like their perspective of what's too many stratagems is very far removed from mine. It needs to be like 3 times this small. 6 impactful stratagems per faction. That's it. There's still plenty of different units and choices to keep games fresh in the game without having to constantly worry about off-table special powers. People uniformly don't like the stratagem system. There's too many stratagems, and yet there still seems to be dozens and dozens of stratagems making their way into 10th edition. And how Games Workshop are talking about this suggests that they've totally misunderstood the feedback from players. I think that they think that the problem is that players have to open more than one book at the table to find out what their army does. And sure, okay, that's a problem, but really, the real problem for casual players is to actually remember what anything does, because there are just so many stratagems and special rules to keep track of that the game feels like a whirlwind of different interactions. And this leads to unfun gotcha moments. We already had Wahapedia to centralize all the information in the game. I get the designers probably can't use Wahapedia in the design studio, but they really should. It's a very useful tool. And if they did, they'd realize that what we need is just for there to be straight up less information in the process. It's not a problem of where the rules are. The game doesn't have to be 1-page rules level of simple, but there's a big difference between Grimdark Futures level of simplicity and the 40k Winchester Mansion. The design mantra of 10th edition should have echoed Coco Chanel's less but better. Though, you know, do so without being affiliated with the Nazis. Seriously, Coco, who flees towards Nazi Germany? Not to mention that when the codices start rolling out again, the entire problem of needing more than one book will return exactly as it is now. And as new detachments and sub-factions are added, that means there'll be more stratagems added to the game over and over, and yeah, 10th edition threatens to look exactly like 9th, like nothing changed at all. So what's the point? I really hope I'm wrong here. I want 40k to be good, and a lot of this will depend on how it actually plays in practice, what the actual numbers of stratagems are, whether codices end up adding power creep into the game again, but I can't help but see all the little doors that GW are carefully leaving unlocked and open for themselves to expressly monetize in the future with how they're describing the core fundamental systems to 10th edition. And what they've described, it seems like 10th edition may be destined to become as bloated, as unwieldy, as unfun, or even more as 9th edition. Ultimately, as a public corporation, GW are going to be tempted to monetize their player base as aggressively as possible. And the game is going to suffer if they give themselves over to that impulse. They don't have to do this. They don't have to taste the flesh of man. The game doesn't need codices for every single army. We could stick with indexes for the lifespan of the game. There's nothing written in the stars that says Games Workshop need to be predatory about how they monetize Warhammer. In fact, if the game becomes a bloated mess like 9th edition, I'd argue that that will do real long-term damage to the brand and actively make the player base smaller, resulting in less money for GW. If they betray the expectations of players here, that the game is going to go straight back into a rut. I have always argued that a good game is one of the strongest ways to grow the Warhammer community by providing something that makes people want to stick around. I really hope that the designers share my vision in that. And hell, they may want to, but will they be allowed to by the GW executives? I'm getting very nervous here. During the announcement of 10th, there was a moment where I was worried for one-page rules. It felt like Games Workshop had figured out that there's a huge audience for a more elegant, simpler rule set that is focused on being fun at the table. But now that I'm reading how this new 10th edition is shaping up, I'm not sure that they have anything to be afraid of. I'm hoping that I'll be able to actually play some 10th edition at Warhammer Fest later this month and see how the game plays in practice, especially with detachment rules, and let you guys know what I think about it. I've been reviewing lots of different war games on my Patreon, so check it out. There's a link in the description, so it'll be fun to compare it to a lot of other games. And a huge thanks to my patrons, especially Sonic Bread and Crypto Kev, and I'll see y'all next time. Bye-bye.